A man borrows £1,000 to expand his cattle business. His trusted partner vanishes with the cash. Now he's broke, homeless, and declared an enemy of the state. What would you do? Roll over and accept defeat? Not if you're Rob Roy McGregor. This Highland warrior chose revenge instead, launching a decades-long campaign of cattle raids and guerrilla warfare that would make him a legend. But was he really the noble freedom fighter we think he was, or just a clever criminal who knew how to pick his battles? Today we're diving deep into the real story of Scotland's most famous outlaw, separating the man from the myth and discovering why his tale still captivates us 3 centuries later. Our story begins on March 7, 1671, when Robert McGregor drew his first breath near the shores of Loch Katrina in the wild heart of the Scottish Highlands. This wasn't just any ordinary birth. This child would grow up to challenge dukes, defy kings, and become the stuff of legend. But first, let's understand the world he was born into. The nickname Rob Roy wasn't some romantic invention. In Gaelic, Roy comes from ruad, meaning red, a direct reference to his fiery hair and ruddy complexion. Highland culture had this beautiful tradition of naming people based on their most striking features. You'd meet folks called Yellow John for their blonde locks or Bald Duncan for obvious reasons. It was practical, memorable, and very Scottish. Rob's father, Donald Glass McGregor, held the position of tacksman. Think of it as a Highland middle manager with teeth. He controlled land for the clan chief, collected rents, and was expected to raise armed men when trouble came calling. His mother, Margaret Campbell, came from one of Scotland's most powerful families. Now here's where it gets interesting. The McGregors and Campbells were traditional enemies, making this marriage about as controversial as a Montague marrying a Capulet. Being a tacksman's son meant Rob grew up with privilege, but it came with strings attached. These families were the backbone of Highland society, sitting just below the clan chiefs in the social hierarchy. They had wealth, influence, and most importantly, the respect that comes from being able to swing a broadsword with deadly precision. The McGregors had quite the family tree, or at least they claimed to. Their motto, "Royal is my race," wasn't just Highland bluster. They traced their lineage back to Gregor of the Golden Bridles, supposedly brother to Kenneth MacAlpin, the king who united Scotland in the 9th century. Whether this was true or just clever marketing by ambitious ancestors, it gave the clan serious bragging rights and a sense of destiny that would shape Rob's entire worldview. But destiny has a way of taking sharp turns. In 1603, the McGregors faced off against the Colquhoun clan at the Battle of Glen Fruin. They won the fight, but lost the war. King James VI was so furious at their victory over a royal-backed force that he did something almost unthinkable. He banned the McGregor name itself. For over 170 years, being a McGregor was literally illegal. Imagine having your family name erased by royal decree. Talk about holding a grudge. This backdrop of persecution and defiance shaped young Rob's character. He grew up Presbyterian, following the austere Scottish version of Protestantism that emphasized personal relationship with God over church hierarchy. But Highland spirituality was complex, mixing Christian doctrine with ancient beliefs in fairies, witches, and supernatural forces. Rob would carry this spiritual flexibility throughout his life, eventually converting to Catholicism in his final years. As Rob matured, he entered the family business. Cattle protection. This wasn't your typical ranch work. Highland society ran on what was essentially an elaborate protection racket called the Watch. Lowland farmers would pay Highland clans to guard their cattle grazing in the mountains. If rustlers struck, the clan either recovered the livestock or compensated the owners in full. It was legitimate business, but the line between protector and predator was razor thin. Rob excelled at this work, building a fearsome reputation that opened doors and loosened purse strings. He commanded respect through a combination of business acumen and barely controlled violence. Stories spread of his unusual physical attributes, arms so long he could allegedly touch his knees while standing upright. Whether true or not, these tales added to his mystique and practical advantage in sword fights. Success breeds confidence, and confidence can breed disaster. Rob decided to expand his operation by borrowing heavily to increase his cattle herd. The loan came primarily from James Graham, the Marquis of Montrose, a powerful nobleman with Unionist sympathies. Rob entrusted the borrowed money to his chief herder, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The man simply vanished with the cash, leaving Rob unable to repay his debt. In Highland society, defaulting on a loan wasn't just financial embarrassment, it was social suicide. Montrose moved quickly and ruthlessly, evicting Rob from his lands at Inversnaid and declaring him an outlaw. Rob's comfortable life as a respectable cattleman evaporated overnight, replaced by the harsh reality of exile and disgrace. But Rob Roy McGregor wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly. If Montrose wanted to play hardball, Rob would show him what that really looked like. He declared a blood feud against the Graham clan that would define the next phase of his life. This wasn't just personal animosity, it was Highland justice, an eye for an eye taken to its logical extreme. The Campbells, eternal rivals of the Grahams, saw opportunity in Rob's fury. Archibald Campbell, newly elevated to Duke of Argyll, offered Rob protection and employment as his local enforcer. The deal came with conditions. Rob had to surrender his weapons and build a house on Campbell land. Rob's response was pure Highland cunning. He handed over a collection of rusty blunt weapons while keeping his real arsenal hidden. The fake swords can still be seen at Inverary Castle today, a testament to his cleverness. Now officially under Campbell protection but still burning for revenge, Rob began his campaign against the Grahams. His tactics were brilliant in their simplicity. Knowing when and where Montrose's tax collectors would visit landowners, Rob and his men would arrive first, claiming to collect on behalf of the Duke. When the real collectors showed up days later, they'd find empty coffers and confused taxpayers who'd already paid the Duke's representative. Rob's most audacious move came when he targeted Graham of Killern, one of Montrose's key associates. The plan was worthy of a spy thriller. First, Rob spread rumors that he'd fled to Ireland, lowering everyone's guard. Then he assembled his men in the woods near Chapeldarroch village and marched boldly into the local inn where Graham was conducting business. Picture the scene. Graham sees his nemesis approaching and frantically hides the tax money in the loft before trying to act casual. Rob enters, lays down his sword, and orders drinks all around. For a while, it's just another evening of Highland hospitality, laughing, drinking, storytelling. Then Rob signals his piper to play a specific tune. That melody was the signal his hidden warriors had been waiting for. As his men surrounded the building, Rob's demeanor shifted from jovial guest to dangerous predator. He demanded the money Graham claimed not to have collected. When Graham continued his denials, Rob lost patience. He kidnapped the tax collector and had him dumped on a remote island in the middle of a loch, where he stayed for days before being released, his reputation in tatters. These weren't random acts of violence, they were calculated moves in a larger game. Rob was building a reputation as someone who couldn't be pushed around, someone who made powerful enemies pay for their arrogance. But every action has consequences, and Rob's were mounting. The government eventually branded his group a marauding clan and put a bounty of £1,000 on his head, serious money that attracted serious hunters. Rob and his men were forced to take refuge in the forests around Ben Lomond, living like medieval outlaws in the 18th century. Even hiding in the woods, Rob's reputation preceded him. The Duke of Athol sent a messenger claiming he wanted to honor the great warrior with a visit to his castle. Rob, perhaps flattered or simply curious, accepted the invitation. Big mistake. Athol's wife insisted that weapons weren't allowed in her home, so Rob handed over his sword and dirk. The moment he was disarmed, 60 armed men surrounded him. He'd walked straight into a trap. But if you think this is where Rob Roy's story ends, you don't know Highlanders. During his captivity at a local inn, Rob did what he did best. He charmed his guards. Night after night of drinking and storytelling built genuine friendships with the men supposed to be watching him. Eventually, they trusted him enough to let him walk around unescorted. One evening, Rob stepped outside, claiming he needed to meet a messenger about sending word to his wife. His guards, deep in their cups, barely looked up. Rob calmly walked to the stables, mounted a horse, and rode off into the night. By morning, he was back at his own home, free as the Highland air. The audacity didn't stop there. When a massive force assembled outside his house the next day, led by the Grahams seeking final revenge, Rob simply appeared in his doorway with sword in hand. The sight of him, defiant and unbroken, was enough to send the entire force retreating. Sometimes reputation is the most powerful weapon of all. Rob's personal war was playing out against the backdrop of much larger political upheavals. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 had placed William of Orange and Mary on the throne, displacing the Catholic James II. This created a permanent split in British politics between those who accepted the new Protestant monarchy and those who remained loyal to the deposed Stuart line. The MacGregors, despite their past troubles with royal authority, were staunch Jacobites, supporters of the Stuart claim. This put Rob in an interesting position. His protector, the Duke of Argyll, supported the crown while his personal sympathies lay with the opposition. It was a balancing act that required all his Highland cunning. When the 1715 Jacobite Rising erupted, Rob found himself caught between conflicting loyalties. The Earl of Mar raised the Stuart banner, calling Highland clans to arms against King George I. Rob gathered his men and joined the Jacobite cause, but his role in the crucial Battle of Sheriffmuir remains controversial to this day. Some claim he deliberately arrived late to avoid committing fully to either side. Others argue he simply got lost trying to locate the enemy. What we know for certain is that when Rob and his men finally reached the battlefield, the fight was essentially over. Hundreds lay dead, but neither side could claim victory. The uprising fizzled out within months, leaving many Jacobites wondering what might have been. The failed rebellion brought consequences. Parliament passed the Indemnity Act of 1717, pardoning most Jacobite participants, but specifically excluding the MacGregor clan. Once again, Rob's family found themselves outlawed while their former enemies received royal forgiveness. It was a bitter pill that only strengthened Rob's resolve to continue his personal war against the establishment. For years, Rob maintained his shadow campaign against Montrose and his allies. He refined his tactics, becoming more careful but no less effective. His raids continued, but now he operated with the precision of a guerrilla commander rather than the reckless abandon of his earlier years. Age and experience had taught him the value of patience. The Spanish, locked in conflict with Britain during the War of the Quadruple Alliance, saw opportunity in Scottish discontent. In 1719, they landed 300 troops in the Hebrides, linking up with Highland Jacobites for another attempt at restoring the Stuarts. Rob joined this expedition despite his advancing age and the risks involved. The two forces met at Glen Shiel on June 10, 1719. Rob and his men took strong positions in the craggy terrain they knew intimately, facing off against better-equipped British regulars. The battle was fought largely at distance, both sides trading musket fire across a narrow mountain pass. Some accounts suggest Rob was wounded, though this remains unconfirmed. Despite numerical advantage and favorable terrain, the Jacobite-Spanish alliance couldn't overcome superior British discipline and firepower. The rebel army scattered into the hills and the Spanish troops were eventually captured. Rob once again melted away into the Highland wilderness, his reputation intact, but his cause defeated. The failure at Glen Shiel marked the end of serious Jacobite military activity for a generation. Rob returned to his old life of feuding with the Grahams while trying to avoid government attention. But time was catching up with him. By 1722, a combination of betrayal from within his own clan and relentless pressure from Montrose finally led to his capture. Rob was taken to Edinburgh and imprisoned, likely in the famous castle that dominates the city's skyline. For 5 long years, the Highland warrior who had defied dukes and kings found himself behind bars. His legend grew during this captivity as stories of his exploits spread throughout Scotland. His release in 1727 came through a combination of political calculation and personal connections. The Jacobite threat seemed dormant, making Rob more valuable as a folk hero than a political prisoner. His influential friends, including some who had remained neutral during his outlaw years, worked behind the scenes to secure his freedom. The Rob Roy who emerged from Edinburgh Castle was a changed man. Now in his mid-50s, he had neither the energy nor the inclination for constant warfare. His final years were marked by a surprising spiritual transformation. He converted to Roman Catholicism, perhaps revealing beliefs he'd hidden throughout his Presbyterian upbringing. The conversion ceremony included confession with a Catholic priest named Alexander Drummond. When the priest asked Rob to forgive his enemies as part of the ritual, the old warrior hesitated. Forgiving the Grahams after decades of blood feud wasn't easy, but eventually he agreed. It seems even Rob Roy MacGregor could find peace in his final chapter. His death came in late 1734, though the exact date remains disputed, either December 28th or 31st. True to form, Rob orchestrated his final moments with Highland drama. He requested his finest clothes, called for his piper, and asked for music until his last breath. Legend has it he demanded his weapons be brought to his bedside, declaring that no enemy would ever see Rob Roy MacGregor defenseless. As the piper played "I Return No More," one of Scotland's most famous outlaws passed into history at age 63. He was buried in Balkidder churchyard, where his grave still bears the defiant inscription, "MacGregor despite them," a final gesture of clan pride that endures to this day. But here's where the story gets really interesting. For nearly a century after his death, Rob Roy remained a relatively minor historical figure, known mainly in the Highlands where his exploits had unfolded. His transformation into a national icon came thanks to Sir Walter Scott's 1817 novel Rob Roy. Scott's book was historical fiction, not biography, but it captured something powerful about Highland culture and Scottish identity that resonated far beyond Scotland's borders. Published during Europe's age of romantic nationalism, when peoples across the continent were rediscovering their cultural roots, the novel struck gold. 10,000 copies sold immediately, massive numbers for that era. Scott created the Rob Roy we think we know, the chivalrous outlaw fighting oppression, the Highland warrior defending traditional freedoms against encroaching government control. This literary Rob Roy became more real to most people than the historical figure, and that's the version that has endured for over 200 years. But what was the real Rob Roy actually like? The evidence suggests a complex figure who doesn't fit neatly into either the hero or villain category. He was undoubtedly brave, cunning, and charismatic. His ability to survive decades as an outlaw in a world where powerful enemies wanted him dead speaks to exceptional skill and intelligence. Yet he was also a man of his time and place, operating within a system where violence was currency, and loyalty was survival. His protection rackets, cattle raids, and intimidation tactics weren't revolutionary acts. They were business as usual in Highland society. The romantic notion of Rob as a freedom fighter may say more about our desires for heroes than about historical reality. His relationship with the Jacobite cause reveals similar complexity. While he supported the Stuart claim and fought in their rebellions, his motivations seem more practical than ideological. The MacGregors backed the Stuarts partly because they were fellow outsiders, victims of the same government persecution. Rob's Jacobitism may have been less about divine right monarchy and more about clan survival. The financial disaster that triggered his outlaw career also hints at opportunism rather than principle. Rob borrowed money to expand his business, not to fund political resistance. When that venture collapsed through his partner's betrayal, he turned to banditry as much from necessity as from noble conviction. This doesn't diminish his achievements or his place in Scottish culture. Rob Roy succeeded in creating and maintaining an independent power base in a region where central authority was supposed to reign supreme. He outmaneuvered some of Scotland's most powerful nobles, escaped seemingly impossible situations, and built a legend that outlasted his enemies. His story also illuminates the broader struggle between Highland and Lowland Scotland during a period of massive cultural change. The clan system that produced Rob Roy was already under attack from modernizing forces that saw Highland culture as backward and dangerous. Rob's resistance to figures like Montrose wasn't just personal. It represented a whole way of life fighting for survival. The government's eventual success in pacifying the Highlands came at enormous cost to traditional Scottish culture. The Highland clearances that followed would empty entire glens of their people, replacing ancient communities with sheep farms and sporting estates. In this context, Rob Roy's defiance takes on deeper meaning as one of the last gasps of an ancient world. Today, Rob Roy's influence extends far beyond Scotland's borders. The Rob Roy Way, a 79-mile hiking trail through his old territory, attracts thousands of visitors annually. In New Zealand, mountains and glaciers bear his name, placed there by Scottish emigrants who carried his story to the other side of the world. A major Hollywood film starring Liam Neeson brought his tale to global audiences in 1995. But perhaps the most lasting tribute is how Rob Roy has come to embody something essential about the Scottish character. The refusal to bow down, the determination to fight against impossible odds, the loyalty to clan and kin that transcends political convenience. Whether the historical Rob Roy actually embodied these qualities is almost beside the point. The myth serves a purpose that pure history cannot. This raises fascinating questions about how we create and use our cultural heroes. Rob Roy, the legend, gives us someone to admire, a figure who represents values we want to preserve. Rob Roy the man was more complicated, sometimes admirable, sometimes brutal. Always human. Both versions have their place in how we understand the past and ourselves. The tension between myth and reality in Rob Roy's story reflects broader challenges in how we interpret history. Do we focus on verifiable facts even when they're incomplete and potentially disappointing? Or do we embrace the stories that inspire us even when they stretch the truth? Perhaps the answer is to appreciate both. The flawed, complex human being who actually lived, and the heroic figure who captures something true about human aspiration and resistance. Rob Roy's grave in Balquhidder remains a pilgrimage site for those seeking connection to Scotland's wild past. Visitors come not just to pay respects to a historical figure, but to something he represents. The idea that ordinary people can stand up to power, that David can still face Goliath, that legends can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. In our modern world of corporate power and government surveillance, there's something appealing about a man who made his own rules and answered to no authority but his own conscience. Rob Roy's story reminds us that resistance is possible, that individuals can make a difference, and that sometimes the best response to injustice is to fight back with everything you've got. So what's the verdict on Rob Roy McGregor? Was he a principled freedom fighter or an opportunistic criminal? The answer probably lies somewhere in between. He was a product of his time and circumstances, shaped by forces beyond his control but refusing to be broken by them. He found ways to thrive in impossible situations, to turn disadvantage into advantage, and to create meaning from chaos. His story endures because it speaks to something universal in human experience: the desire for justice, the refusal to accept defeat, and the power of individual will against overwhelming odds. Whether fighting corrupt tax collectors or escaping impossible traps, Rob Roy McGregor proved that one person with courage and cunning can change the game. The Highland warrior who died nearly 3 centuries ago continues to inspire because his story is ultimately about more than cattle raids and clan feuds. It's about dignity, resilience, and the refusal to let others define your worth. In a world that often feels controlled by forces beyond our influence, Rob Roy reminds us that rebellion is always possible, and that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to refuse to surrender the future. That's the real legacy of Rob Roy McGregor. Not the specific details of 18th century Highland politics, but the eternal human story of resistance, survival, and the power of legends to outlive the people who create them. Whether hero or villain, freedom fighter or opportunist, he remains unforgettable because his story is at its heart our story too.